Welcome to part 2 in my All About Bees Going to the Heather video collection. In part 1 I covered the history of going to the heather in Scotland, showed you how to choose a heather stance, how to prepare the colonies for the heather, and how and when to move them. In part 2 I will explain my management system on the moors, how I bring the bees home, extract the honey and prepare the bees for winter. If you are enjoying these videos, please click the like and subscribe button below, especially if you don't want to miss out on any new video releases, and I really would be delighted to receive comments or questions. Bees can starve at the moors, so please keep a close eye on the weather and the nectar flow and feed fondant in an emergency. Once the flow starts, add supers when needed and make sure you check each stance after a windy night or you might be in for a surprise. This was a disaster for bee farmer John Lockwood in Dumfries and Galloway. The straps kept some of his hives intact, but many of them were simply tossed around the mountain by the strong wind. As you can see here, this is the exception rather than rule though. Cut comb heather honey is the par excellence of honey and is much sought after by consumers. The added bonus for the beekeeper is that there is no extracting to be done, so you might want to go for this option. You can buy attractive display boxes that enhance the presentation of your cut comb, or simply place it in a cut comb tray with a lid. If selling it, the usual labelling regulations apply. You can insert full frames of thin foundation to get cut comb honey, but I actually add 1-inch strips of thin foundation secured in place with molten beeswax. Just use a candle, and if you are lucky, the bees will draw out natural comb and fill it with heather honey. It is important that the hive is level, otherwise the comb will not be level, so you may want to take a spirit level with you. Here's a nice full frame of heather honey drawn out from starter strips and destined to become cut comb. You can also try and get the bees to fill what we call sections with honey. This doesn't come natural to the bees and is a dying art in beekeeping. Only the skilled and experienced beekeepers seem to manage it. I usually leave my hives at the heather until the second week in September, but I'm flexible with this, as in some years the heather will yield late into September. You will find that the bees don't readily leave supers of heather honey, so if the weather is fine, I will brush the bees off each frame rather than using a clearer board. If necessary, I place an empty super back on the hive to provide space for the bees during the move, which I always do early in the morning. The bees have been brushed off each frame here, and the super of honey is easily transported home in the back of the pickup. I take the hives to the winter site where they are given 14 kg of invert bee in bulk feeders and treated for varroa. Heather honey is thixotropic, so for the hobby beekeepers is usually extracted using a heather press like this in the photograph. Thixotropic means it is a jelly, not a liquid, due to the higher protein content. It cannot be spun out like normal honey. Most beekeepers use a honey press to press the honey from the comb. You simply cut the comb from the frame with a knife and place it inside a linen cloth inside the press. As pressure acts on the comb, it squeezes the honey out. It is filtered by the cloth and flows into the honey bucket. It does take quite a while. I press my heather honey frames for years, and it does take an age. In 2013 I did a really good heather crop with 70 supers of honey to extract, which would have taken me up to Christmas if I had used the press. I also didn't want to lose the drawn comb, so I invested in a heather loosener. It cost me about £3,000, probably more than that now, and is one of the best pieces of kit I have ever bought. The frames are uncapped as usual with a knife, and each frame is placed into the loosener. The handle is cranked 5 times and this moves the frame along, and needles are plunged into the cells. This makes the honey liquid for about 20 minutes and can then be spun out in a tangential extractor. I also bought the tangential extractor, another £3,000 or £4,000. It is a swing basket tangential extractor, which means it automatically goes into reverse. If you have a normal extractor tangential, you would have to take the frames out and turn them round. If you don't want to spend £3,000 or £4,000, you can buy handheld looseners for about 150 quid, or an uncapping roller for about a tenner. You can jar it straight away or store it in buckets for future use. It will have lots of air bubbles in it, so it is important to fill the jar to the top. If you heat the honey excessively, you are in danger of spoiling it, but contrary to popular belief, warming it to 40 Celsius will enable you to fine filter it, and at this temperature you won't spoil the honey. You must continue to stir the honey while filtering it, otherwise it will not pass through the filter. I run it straight into buckets, but it will need filtering later as described above. It often granulates with a coarse crystal which is unattractive to consumers, so I seed it with between 10 and 20% of oilseed rape honey. To do this, you need to heat the granulated heather honey to about 50 Celsius until all the crystals are dissolved. Let it cool overnight and then stir in the oilseed rape honey that's been warmed to about 37 Celsius and stirred excessively to make it a cream-like consistency. Oilseed rape honey sets with a very fine crystal, and the seed will ensure the heather honey also sets with the same fine crystal, which is smooth on the tongue and very desirable. To jar the honey, I simply warm it to about 37 Celsius so that it flows and settles nicely in the jar. If you jar it at lower temperatures, it folds in the jar and this doesn't look very attractive. Let's have a look at the big boys in bee farming, and they don't come much bigger than Murray McGregor of Den Rosa Apiaries. He runs about 3,000 production colonies, and his entire philosophy and management approach is geared to having his colonies in prime condition to take advantage of the ling heather in August. He relies heavily on making splits in the spring to ensure very large colonies with a lot of what he calls bee power, capable of working the ling late into the beekeeping season. Murray further strengthens the colonies by uniting the splits and often uses the demery system to control swarming. Just look at the size of Murray's hives at the heather. He also uses deep brood boxes as supers, so you imagine they'll be very heavy. Again, here's some more of Murray's hives at the heather, with trees providing some nice wind protection. And here you can see the frames beginning to fill with heather honey. Murray averages 50 to 60 tons of heather honey from his production colonies. Can you imagine that amount of honey? The break-even point for his large operation is achieved with an average of 14 kg per hive at the heather. He sells his honey to third parties in barrels, thus saving the expense and time involved if you had to run a bottling plant. John Mellis is a bee farmer based near Dumfries, and he runs about 400 colonies, again with a big emphasis on obtaining a ling heather crop. John has a fully automated, purpose-built extraction facility that always turns me green with envy. This is his uncapping machine, tangential swing basket extractor and spin dryer into which all his heather honey is placed. It gets filtered and comes out as a nice cream type of heather honey. It's filtered with a coconut coir mat. This neat machine on the left is a capping screw which retrieves the heather honey from cappings and produces blocks of beeswax for processing. And on the right is John's automated jarring machine. John harvested 8 tons of honey in 2018, which was a very good year for him. I just want to finish with a story about Professors Tom Seeley and Francis Ratnicks, who were the main speakers at the SBA convention we held in Elgin in 2015. I hosted a trip to the heather on the Sunday after the main event, and Tom and Francis came along with a group of about 30 of us. I gave a short talk to the group on heather and heather honey, and then bee suits donned, we approached the hives. Unaccustomed to the local Scottish strain of bees, Professor Seeley had brought a very flimsy head veil, while Professor Ratnicks thought he would be safe with no protection at all. We talked Tom into wearing a full bee suit, although it did have a hole in the veil, but Francis declined. I opened up the strains of my Buckfast bees first, and as usual they were very calm on the comb and very well behaved. When we moved along and approached the local Scottish bees, however, they did what all of the local beekeepers knew they would. Bees poured out of the entrance to protect their honey, and Professor Ratnicks admirably did the 200-metre run back to the vehicles in Usain Bolt style. Although Professor Seeley was wearing a full bee suit, he was stung on the face by a bee that somehow managed to get through the hole in his veil. But it turns out that he is as tough as old nails, so there was no problem. That completes my two-part series on going to the heather. If I've whetted your appetite and you want to give it a go, then you have about 2 or 3 weeks to find a site, prepare your bees and get your hives up the mountain. If you do give it a go, I would be delighted to find out how you got on. If you are enjoying these videos, please like and subscribe below and consider buying me a beer, more appropriate than coffee in the heat of Spain, on my buymeacoffee.com site, where you will find lots of bee related articles. The link is under the description below. If you have already bought me a beer, thanks very much. It helps me to maintain the channel and keep posting more videos. I would also appreciate any comments or questions and promise that I will reply to all of them. That's all for now. Adios amigos.